Good evening. Good evening. How's everyone doing? Hopefully, everyone is doing fine. Their families are still doing well. Glad you guys could join me. We're going to have a discussion here tonight dealing with black men and law enforcement. So go ahead, share this stream with your friends, share this with others out there in the community that you know care about black males and also care about the community in the direction in which we're going. Go ahead, take your time, do that for us. And right now we are streaming on StreamYard. So if you would like to, you could go to StreamYard backslash Facebook and let them utilize your name from Facebook. So when you're posting, it can pop up here on our actual screen. I'll be also looking at our comments to see what it is that we have to answer those questions. I'm looking for an engaging evening tonight so that we can discuss some of these things that are really creating issues and have been creating issues and tensions and separations within our neighborhoods. I don't know about you all, but I'm getting sick and tired of being sick and tired. I don't know about you all, but we're looking for some solutions that can address some of the problems that we have. I don't know about you all, but sometimes we look out there and we see that we're oftentimes dealing with the symptoms as opposed to the root cause of the issues. That would be similar to treating a sneeze as opposed to actually treating the cold. So we're looking at a lot of things that we need to do in our communities to really move us forward because it's kind of like one person gave me an analogy on a airplane. When you're on an airplane, whether you're sitting in first class or last class, when the plane has difficulty, everyone has the same amount of concern. So as we're in these communities together, it's not like we're separated. We must learn to, one, understand each other, appreciate each other, and care about each other. We also have to look at it, who is it that's staffing our law enforcement positions? How are we doing that? Who do we have that's working on our teams? And so when we're looking at these things, these are some community concerns. And tonight we're going to be talking about some of those community concerns. We're going to be talking about what can we do to deal with them. And as I stated, we're going to be talking about some things such as where do we go from here? Some of the things that we look at is what are the backgrounds of individuals that are in law enforcement? Who wants to be a law enforcement officer? How do we do that? Do we understand that all lives, and particularly Black lives, matter? And it's interesting when the first portion of the Black Lives Matter came up, individuals were not really aware of how that actually started. And some people started using it cliche and giving it a wrong connotation when they were doing things in the name of Black Lives Matter. But we need to really look and understand and dig behind things that are out there. And it was a commentary that I read a while back where people were saying Black Lives Matter, and then they say all lives matter. And one young lady had really put it succinctly. She said that what they're saying is Black Lives Matter too, because it appears as though from some of the actions and the things that we're seeing in the media, things that we're seeing on social media, that Black lives do not matter also. So we're trying to make sure that just as we value every life, we also should be valuing Black lives. And yes, there's some out there that say, yes, there are things that are happening in the Black community and that type of stuff. Yes, those are some things that are happening. Those things happen in all communities. But what we're specifically dealing with right now is the interaction that Black males have been having with law enforcement, how some of those things have been turning out. How do we deal with them? And I've also looked over there, and it's gentleman out there that has a tremendous following. He's over on Instagram, and he was talking about it, and his followers were talking about how things are. What do we look at? What do we have to do? Some individuals are saying it's time for an eye for an eye. Some individuals are saying, why aren't the officers arrested? Some are saying, how did they get fired so soon? There are a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and I understand those. What I'm looking at that I want to do is just have a conversation with us, talk about some things, peel back some layers, and see can't we really just see what our next steps are to address the things that are happening. Want to give us enough time to make sure individuals are sharing, caring, getting out there, getting their things together so they can sit down. I'm looking forward to having a good evening tonight, talking with some individuals. I see that some of my individuals from the South Florida chapter of Noble are here with our social media extraordinaire Selena Hightower out there putting those things out for us. We're looking to have some conversations because even in some of the Instagram chats and I have to find the gentleman's name. I know my friend and cousin out there posted some things that the gentleman was talking about and really calling into question what is that we're doing as Black law enforcement executives to address these issues, which are very good questions. We need the community. We need to know what concerns are, and together we can do a lot of things, and individually we can't do that much. So we're going to be talking about those. There are a lot of other law enforcement organizations out there, and sometimes I want to just talk to the community because sometimes you may not know who to contact, which organizations to reach out to, which city officials to reach out to. And we're also going to even discuss the importance of voting because all of those things come into play when we're dealing with these particular issues. Those things that we're dealing with, I am really glad that we're going to have some conversations here with this. And right now we're about 5 after the hour. Want to make sure everybody is here with us as we begin this conversation because we are really going to dive deep into some of these particular things dealing with our Black males, law enforcement, where we're going from here and where we're going to be taking it. If anyone has anything that they're want me to address, please put those in the questions or the comment section. And as you share them, be able to have your things out there where you can let me know what's going on. And if we have to have a follow-up conversation, I'm sure we're going to be having some more of those. Individuals have already been contacting me. So I'm looking forward to having this discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to just jump on in here and so that we can kind of say exactly what it is that we're going to be doing. And let me formally introduce myself. I'm Dr. Gregory A. Salters, and I am a major with a major law enforcement in South Florida. And I want us to know that what we're talking about tonight is not a reflection and does not hold with my agency. I am not speaking as a major with the police department. I am speaking as a Black male who is a law enforcement executive, that I was Black long before I was a law enforcement officer. So we're going to be having to have some conversations and come forward. And yes, Carlton Harris, I see you there. You're saying there needs to be more honesty. If an officer did it wrong, then say so and stop trying to cover up with fear for my life, or he was resisting. Be honest and we can grow. I agree with some of those type things, and I agree honesty is there. We're going to even get into that when we actually talk about some procedural justice, and we're going to be talking about some transparency. So a lot of the things that we have, what I'm looking to do is bridge that gap from a law enforcement executive standpoint, someone who has worked the streets of the inner city. I've worked with the DARE programs. I've worked internal affairs. I've worked administration. I've worked the HR portion of the police department. So we're going to be able to have some of those conversations. So just a little bit more about me. I'm a graduate of Florida A&M University, came out of business administration. And law enforcement was never a career field that I aspired to because when I grew up, that was just not something that the Black males really wanted to do. We didn't really have many examples of the law enforcement. So I graduated from Florida A&M with business administration, worked banking and finance. A friend of mine, fraternity brother, when you start talking about those connections, I appreciate him for doing that. Zimbalist Chalk saw that I wanted to give back to the community. And he said, what better way to do it than law enforcement? And when you talk to a lot of police officers, especially those that are minorities, we got into this field to actually serve the community. And many of the professionals I work with are here to serve the community. And as with any other thing, there are a few bad apples that definitely spoil the bunch, and they definitely do not deserve to be wearing the badge and holding the honor of a public servant and a police officer. And we do need to deal with them. So when we look at it, we go out here, and I started working in law enforcement. And it was definitely not an easy trek because one of the things that we have to do down here in South Florida, in Broward County specifically, you have to pass a swim test to turn in your application. Now that in and of itself, as you can imagine, can be a limiter for some Blacks, and you'll find out that there are more of us that work in corrections down here in South Florida, percentage-wise, than work in law enforcement. And I wanted to be in law enforcement because as a law enforcement officer, we have an opportunity to engage and interact and determine who enters into the criminal justice system. So now when we look at things, we're going out here and we're saying, what is it that we do? How do we do the job? Since being in law enforcement, I've worked on bike patrol, DARE. I've worked internal affairs. I have worked and supervised in most areas of the police department in all 3 of our bureaus. Our agency is a fairly large agency. And I am now serving as a major and in charge of many of our special operations. And so I've been there. And in terms of trainings, I've been to the FBI NA, I've been to SMIP, I've done the PERF, I've done the SPI leadership class, I've done the Master's in Public Administration, and I earned my doctorate in Adult Ed and Human Resource Development, where I focused on the impact of racial profiling on Black males seeking jobs in law enforcement and committing to law enforcement careers. I have presented race in law enforcement to the South Florida Office of the FBI. I have presented and reviewed the minority retention with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I've taught with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in their first line supervisors course for numerous years. So I've been out here a while. I've been able to really speak with some others in law enforcement and deal with things. So that's me as a background and a little bit of my view, so that you know a little bit about where my discussion is going to be coming from. And when we're talking about it tonight, I must start and say my condolences to the George Floyd family. When I saw that video, as with many other law enforcement officers, it was tremendously disturbing. And that is not what we became law enforcement officers to become a part of that. And we're looking at it, how do we address those issues? And as of right now, a lot of times people in the community are upset. They're wanting things done immediately. And sometimes we're wanting things done immediately and we're having things done, but there are processes that are in place. And I know a lot of people don't like them. They say they move too slow. And that's one thing that I learned about due process in the law enforcement realm, everything like that. And I know how many people in our community say, well, many of the individuals that are dead did not get their due process. And I understand it, and it is frustrating. But what I want us to do is to learn about those processes and work within those processes. And one of the things that also kind of gets me is that I have seen much conversation about these issues. I've seen many individuals that are out and protesting. And I think that a lot of times we are really dealing with things and we aren't really dealing with the systemic nature of our government and the systems that are in place. For instance, I was talking with some individuals and I was asking them about voting. Have they registered to vote? Some individuals told me that their vote does not count. They're not going to vote. And if you look at your voter polls, the percentage of individuals voting are very low. But I think a lot of times people do not vote because they have not had the right information provided to them so that they understand their importance. Many people don't understand that when you're asking how come someone was not convicted, you have to look at their jury, grand jury, and their other juries. Do you realize that the people that serve on the jury, you must be a registered voter to serve on the jury? And then also you have to look at it, you have to also serve, because many times in our community, some individuals are not registered to vote. And then sometimes because of jobs and other things, they have a difficulty serving on the jury. How many of us know someone that will tell you what they did to get out of jury? That also kind of slows us down in our process. And I'm looking at it, I see Mr. Wilson wanted to know what are the efforts to, one, communicate that there are great officers in the community, and two, hire and appoint liaisons to assist during arrest. And three, let me see what your other one is. And I didn't see where the three was, but one of the things you look at, the efforts to communicate that there are great officers, one of the things that you'll find out, I know you are a principal, it's kind of like with our teachers and public servants. Many of us got into the job to serve, and we really do a bad job, or we could say we could really do a better job at advertising or showing or recognizing our outstanding employees, and sometimes we don't. And that's what often happens because it's a double-edged sword. We don't really put it out there, and most times the public, some are sharing the good information, but most times you'll let us know when things go tremendously south. And one of the things that you also look at when you're looking at Ms. Wilson, and you talk about the hire and appoint liaisons to assist during arrest, that that could be problematic because of the nature of arrest. Sometimes there is no time to get a liaison, and Sometimes when we do have crisis intervention stress teams or crisis intervention teams, when there are individuals that may be having issues with mental health, they do come and they assist with those. But other than that, we really don't have the others in place in those type things. And then let me see here if I have another question here. I see Dr. Tracy, I see you. Thank you for joining us. Michelle, how have those trainings assisted you in your role as an executive in law enforcement? Wow. Okay. And that's one that's one of our noble members. One of the things that I will tell you all, when I was reading some of the comments on some of the posts, individuals were stating that they were not aware of NOBLE, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. They weren't aware of the National Association of Black Police Officers. Many of them are also unaware of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Fraternal Order of Police. Many times these organizations are some that we should be reaching out to let them know our concerns so that they can also assist us in some of the issues that we have. And it's kind of like right now, I've been talking with some individuals and we're looking down here as to what happens in our area when and if the protests are to begin. How do we actually engage them? So when you talk about the trainings, Ms. Teague, we have one, when we get to speak with law enforcement executives from around the world, things may not have occurred to where we are, but they may have occurred in another area. I also affectionately refer to NOBLE as the HBCU of law enforcement organizations, because you have the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is an organization that's made up of chiefs of police from throughout the world. But sometimes when you go there, it's like going to a Division I school. You might be lesser in numbers and you might not be as outgoing or feeling as warm, or you may not feel as though you're at the table, even though you're in the room. So we began to go to those trainings, find out what things are, and we're able to sit down with others that may be experiencing the same things or similar things that we are. So I greatly appreciate your question. Let me see which other questions we have that come up. Okay, here is one. Ms. Doman, how can the Black community come together when there are issues such as what has taken place in Minneapolis and Georgia to protest peacefully instead of destroying their own communities? That is a very interesting question, and particularly for the individuals that are running for office. I know I've seen some of the individuals that are running for office. I know I've seen Nadia Assad. I've seen some others that are out here that are running for office. When I had an opportunity to meet with some city managers a few years back after some of the other riots and these type things, we need to let our community know what these actual riots actually cost us. Because have you ever thought about it? Some of these cities, we're coming out of COVID right now, and cities have been locked down and are now facing some serious financial issues with the lack of funding that has come into their cities. When you begin to have riots in your cities and these type things, it will create havoc on your economy, because now when you're having officers, for instance, and working overtime, how is that overtime cost being covered? Also, when you're burning the buildings and this type thing, that causes your insurance costs of your businesses to go up. It is a ripple effect economically to what's happening. So a lot of times when we're trying to address these, it is much bigger than the police issue. And I think that when we begin to show the elected officials what it is that the misdeeds of some officers do and how it can actually impact them and what matters to them, I think we can be able to even build stronger bonds and be able to better even address some of these issues about some of the officers that we have that are doing things that are not in the best interest of the community and are definitely hurting our Black males. Because now you even look at it, there are even studies that are going on out there now that are discussing the impact of stress on the Black male, and they've now even kind of stated that it is almost like a post-traumatic stress syndrome when you're dealing with the stress of the racial profiling, stress of the actual targeting of Black males and what's happening. Because now as this is played out, this goes out among everybody. It goes out as a ripple effect in the community. And while we're looking at it from a race standpoint, I have to agree with Cornel West, where race may not be the main issue, but race does matter in these issues that are coming around. And I had some individuals taking me to task, and they were asking me, when was the last time an officer was really found guilty when they have gone out there and harmed someone? And, everything is Googleable. And if you Google, that was last year, if I'm looking at things correctly, I believe it was a Somali American police officer in Minneapolis who was convicted and was sentenced to 12.5 years. And as it indicates, Somali is a person that would be considered a brown or black male. So even within the law enforcement profession, that was a black male that was convicted at that particular time and sentenced to 12.5 years in the death of a Minneapolis woman. So there have been some cases to where officers have been sentenced. So I appreciate that question. Have some other ones that are coming up. And Ms. Teague, the MOBB, which is that organization, if you could enlighten me? And some of these things that we're looking at, I think that a lot of times when we begin to come together and mobilize and are together, we can really do a lot of things. And it was interesting that when we discuss these particular issues, and you all look out there on Facebook, you look out there on Instagram, and you look out there and you talk to individuals that are really making things happen. Many times I wonder, how do we get this spark? How do we do these things? How do we partner with individuals? How do we go out and have some conversations and bring people together? Because together we can do a lot of things. And when you look at it from a standpoint, when I teach ethics classes, and I often use the analogy in the movie Remember the Titans, when Denzel asks, who is your daddy? Your daddy that he was referring to is actually the community, because we are public servants. So now if you are looking at it and we're actually involved in the process and we're actually doing things, if it is a sheriff that is running your department, that's an elected official. If you're looking at your police chiefs, many times they're in place by your commission, who are elected officials. Elected officials act in the best interest of their constituency, particularly on the local level, because there is no electoral college at the local level. So are we doing all we can to make sure our elected officials are looking at and demanding the same type of professionalism that we're looking for from our officers? And it's kind of interesting when you look at it, it says, okay, who are our law enforcement officers? Who really wants to be a law enforcement officer? Right now, with everything that is going on in our community, who is it that you think would really want to be an officer? And it's really an interesting tale. I see that Mr. Boyer is on here, and he works at the Institute of Public Safety. And we've talked about things. But when you look at it, if you're looking at Black males being law enforcement officers, many of us do not want to be law enforcement officers. We didn't want to get into it because we don't want to be the man. Or there are things that we believe would prevent us from being a law enforcement officer, when many times we need to talk to individuals, and many times the people that know what are going on out there in the street and can really relate to people are the ones we want to be police officers, but for various reasons they elect not to apply. Everybody that's on this call, everybody that is listening, how many times have you had individuals actually you recommend them to be police officers? Say, we need you serving our community. We need people that are upstanding and on the level like you serving the community. Because then we also have individuals to where now you have the Blacks that don't want to be law enforcement officers because they don't want to be the man. And you have allies who are white and this type thing that are outstanding individuals that don't want to be painted as racist because of the few acts of some individuals that may look like them. And we also, let's be honest, because everybody Black is not your brother and everybody white is not your enemy. So we have to understand and judge each person by the content of their character and make sure we are hiring the right individuals and having everything in place. And the interesting thing about what's going on right now in law enforcement, you all can Google this. It was 21st Century Policing. It came out May of 2015 was when the report actually came out. That was when we had different individuals in our political scheme. And when you look at it, the 21st Century Policing laid out 6 pillars And if you dealt with these 6 pillars, they would address most of the things that we're looking at right now. And you'll be seeing things where you're talking about the very first pillar is building trust and legitimacy. How do you build trust? And you often may have heard the phrase, people must know, like, and trust you. And many of the communities to where we've had these incidents, the police department and the community, they did not know, like, and trust each other. It could be that they knew each other, and because they knew each other, they didn't trust each other. It could be because of the actions that have taken place in the community, and they feel as though they have not gotten satisfaction. So therefore, there is no love, like, and trust. And therefore, we lack legitimacy. Then we look over there and people often ask, what is your policy and procedures? I've had to work with some agencies where we actually reviewed policies and procedures on hiring, reviewed policies and procedures on use of force, and these type things to see, are our policies handcuffing us? So that's another thing that we have to look at. Also, we have to look at technology and social media. This is an interesting area for me because when we're talking about building bridges and we talk about community oriented policing was really what policing was about a long time ago. So when you're talking about Sir Robert Peel coming through and you're talking about your Goldsteins and you're talking about your problem oriented policing and all these other theories that you have, basically what we're talking about is engaging with the community. And I have the pleasure of supervising our community engagement team. And it's very interesting hours. And when we go to other agencies and see what people are doing with engagement, it's really interesting because some people look at engagement differently. Some people believe engagement means attending a homeowner's meeting, but not really engaging and talking about what is going on. They'll present numbers or present facts and not really engage the public. So we look at it in these cases to where we've had people in the communities and we have, is it really an engagement? If people really knew the people in the community, you might be able to deal with them better. And there's some police departments that have their neighborhood police officers that live in the community. Some police departments have it to where you have to live in a geographical area to be hired by the agency. There are some merits to that because the philosophy is if you're from the neighborhood, you will be less likely to overreact to certain things. You may be a little bit more attuned to the culture in the neighborhood as opposed to someone coming from outside. The other pillar is community policing and crime reduction. That's when we talk about community-oriented policing, where you go over there, you're doing more problem solving, addressing what goes on, because as you know, our communities are very diverse. What might be accepted in one community may not be accepted in another, not from a legal standpoint, but just from a cultural standpoint. You have to understand those cultures and how those things work. The other one that is a very interesting one is when we talk about our training and education. This is one that is very interesting, is talking about the training and education. Is Wayne Boyer, he says, hire for character, train for skills. And this is one of the things you have to look at. You cannot give anyone character. It's kind of like the saying says, if somebody tells you who you are, who they are, believe them, because we have a lot of those things that we have to really look at. So those are some of the things we look at. And Cedric LaFleur, glad that you were joining us tonight. And we look at the other one. When you look at training, training is a very interesting component within law enforcement because remember how I said systemic things and how things are put into place. How do you become a trainer in law enforcement? One, you have to be hired. Most trainers have been serving as law enforcement officers, have excelled within their agency, have been allowed to or earned the right to get the training to become a law enforcement teacher. Then they had to be in the right circles and network and know the right individuals to get the opportunity to teach either inside their agency, at academies, or in other law enforcement areas. So one, if you have grown through this your life, you have basically maybe created some blind spots, which we all have biases, and we talk about implicit bias. So you have these implicit biases and they're blind spots that you're unaware of. As you train and as you teach, you're passing those implicit biases on, and you're also passing on, if you have great habits, you're also passing on those great habits. So whatever the instructor's lived experiences are, that's how they're being able to move those things forward. The other one is officer wellness and safety. When you're looking at it, many times officers, we always are hearing the officers train. We're dealing with safety. We're dealing with de-escalation techniques. We're dealing with the response to resistance and everything that comes into play there. And what I like for individuals to understand is that response to resistance is it basically outlines how officers respond to our encounters, respond to things, just sometimes with our mere presence, all the way up to, and hopefully not using deadly force. But those are things that come into play as an officer. And many of the things that we're talking about, you can definitely Google those within your own respective areas because they're different across different states as to where it is that your agencies allow and do not allow. And one thing I'd also like to deal with, I see Nikki here was saying that the training has to encompass the social emotional learning of the individuals. Now, that is one that's very interesting because what I see you doing there now, you're tying in our law enforcement with education because the educational realm in your schools and that type of setting deal a lot with the social emotional learning, and that's dealing with the totality of the individuals in which they deal with. Because if you don't deal with the individuals as the totality and as a total being, you can be missing something. And that also happens a lot in law enforcement. So I really appreciate you for inserting that. That is something that is very important that we have to deal with the social emotional learning. Okay. So now, when I'm talking about it again, when you talk about the officer wellness, we've been dealing with officers from their stress. We have been dealing with mental issues of the officers because when I came into law enforcement, we really didn't have much in play to deal with any mental health that we may have needed to deal with. Personally, I've been out there and seen many things tragic that have been out there. And when it comes to the training, we came up and the training came out with the crisis intervention team that really, and crisis intervention stress debriefers, which help the officers debrief and how they de-stress. Because a lot of times when you look at it, and we're talking about what it is that officers do when they're out there on the street and they're dealing with individuals. It's very interesting because even here at my agency, when we're hiring from all over, we say that we're hiring diverse officers. It's interesting when we've hired some individuals that really haven't dealt in an inner city environment. And their idea of an inner city environment is basically second and third hand based on what individuals do. So from a law enforcement agency, we have to put forward the effort to expose our officers to various cultures. We have to also work to have our community engage with us so they can learn police culture. There is a police culture, and people talk about the thin blue line. And when it's dealing with law enforcement here, thin blue line, it's oftentimes portrayed as a negative and this type thing, but it's no more than a group think. Just like when we're on teams and you have that affinity to the team, and it is very it's difficult to break, and I will definitely admit that. And one of the things before we had when I was on with Cedric's show, it was um, Doug Brinkley. He is assistant city manager out in Sugar Land, Texas. He was in law enforcement in Detroit, and he was over in Sugar Land as a assistant police chief, and now assistant city manager. And he was asking from a standpoint of African American law enforcement executives, what are we doing to recruit? What are we doing to really help our agencies grow and go to the next level? And that's one thing I've often talked with a lot of other executives about and supervisors. If you all notice, in most professions, we talk more about the headaches we have in supervision and management than we do the rewards of being in supervision and management. Because we're in supervision and management, we're the ones that can review policies, make policy recommendations and decisions. So are we really taking that to heart? Are we really inviting the community in? Are we really opening ourselves up? And let's say, how do we really close the gap between the police department and the community where we can do these things to where everybody understands that all lives matter? And we can put the two on there or not, but all lives matter. And as public servants, we're out here to serve the community. When you look at it, most times when I've seen things where cops have gone a little too far or where you've seen them on the news. I want to figure out what was going on before, why did we get to this point, and many times that's something that we never get to. And one of the things I want us to look at, that all of you all that are out here that are listening to me and that will be listening to this, the things that I am giving you are various theories, various things that we can put out there, particularly 21st century policing. And the next nugget that I'm going to give you, I want you to really pay attention to it. And if you have to Google it, you can contact me, you can email me, we can have further discussions. But I want you all to really look at procedural justice. Because when you look at procedural justice, you're going to notice that it basically has four tenets. And I'll give you those four tenets or pillars. And that is fairness, voice, transparency, and impartiality. And I'm going to come back to some of that while I answer some of these questions as they're popping up. I see Rick Holton. It is critical at this time for the Black community to come out in full force in support of all of the good officers, and particularly the Black officers on departments. Those officers need to know that you got their backs 100% when they speak up and identify those who don't deserve to wear a badge. If there is an ounce of backlash against one who speaks out, then the organization should feel the wrath of the Black community, organized with power. NBPA, that's the National Black Police Officers Association, NOBLE, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So these are some of the things, and Dr. Rick Holton, I greatly appreciate you coming in here as a retired law enforcement executive and now training out there in our community and training with the law enforcement agencies. Definitely. And Wayne, I see you again with the emotional intelligence. That is definitely a huge piece, because one thing that people don't really understand, we often talk about IQ and how intelligent certain individuals are. The IQ is important, but the IQ is really set at an early age, where your EQ, or your emotional intelligence quotient, can be increased over time. So you have to look at those so you can work to deal with those things. And then, what is it? Here's some others that we have. I'm really enjoying the questions that are coming in so that we can have these discussions. Okay. Daman, I would love to see a group of Black officers lead a protest, letting the world know how they will not allow injustice to take place in minority communities. What you should do also is, if I posted it earlier, is the letter from the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives president. She put out a letter condemning this act. So you can go to, I posted it. So if you follow me, you'll see it there. And if you wish to go to the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, Google them, you will also see what they're doing. The other one, it seems to me that today officers use their weapon to control the scene, as opposed to my experiences growing up in inner city Detroit, where the officer's presence could usually diffuse the situation. Now, we'll put things into perspective, because when you talk about historically, if you look back at officers and how police officers were hired, there was a height and weight requirement. You basically had to be 6 foot 185. And many of us that are in law enforcement now, for that reason and some other reasons, we would not have been able to be law enforcement officers. So at that time, they had the size, and that was what you were actually looking at. And as we have evolved into a career, you will notice there are many officers who are not 6 foot and 185. But there are some individuals, just by their mere presence, and it's not by their stature, but how they carry themselves, they do give off what we'll call command presence, and that does happen in some cases. Here's another one. Wayne, we're also stuck in a management and supervision mindset, and we need to look to leadership. And Wayne, I often talk about that when I'm training at agencies, and you talk about individuals dealing with management versus leadership, and we're stuck in management versus supervision because we really do not get in trouble, actually, or written up or disciplined for failure to take a leadership position. But if you fail to follow some guideline or rule, that would be a management or a hardline rule, you would get disciplined for that. So therefore, many times individuals are doing their job so that they can stay out of trouble, as opposed to taking a leadership role. And sometimes it's just not advantageous for some people to take leadership roles within organizations. And many times we talk about leadership as we talk in our organizations. Sometimes you have individuals that are leading the organization in a downward path. Kind of like when you look at these incidents where individuals have been killed at the hands of law enforcement, particularly the latest one, George Floyd, and you look at others, many times those officers have things that are in their background that shows that they may have had some issues, some may not. And so how do we actually deal with that from a leadership standpoint? And as one of the other individuals posted earlier, they were talking about within law enforcement, many times you have unions. And based on having the unions and what the unions do, outstanding work with defending law enforcement, looking at our contracts and that type of stuff. So a lot of times those issues come into play and making sure that officers are things in the state of Florida where we have the police officers' Bill of Rights are adhered to, so officers get their due process going through things. And a lot of times the public does not understand the due process, and that's where we have to be a little bit more transparent. And that's why I like to go back to the procedural justice, to where if we were actually as transparent as we could be, that helps. And it's helped many times when we've had disturbances in the community, being transparent. Okay. Ms. Lamar, I don't understand how they pass the psychological. Such acts indicate an underlying issue. Well, that's kind of interesting because when you take a psychological exam, it cannot predict what you may or may not do. And certain times when you look at it, at the time that they took the psychological exam, things may not have been like they are 5 to 10 years down the road. When you do studies on ethics, you'll find out that most of the individuals that get into ethical dilemmas have normally been within the agency or within the organization really between 5 to 10 years. Because during that time frame, when you're just there, you're learning your job, and then you might start having the areas of omissions and things start going later and later throughout the process. And that's how you end up having changes, where there are some individuals that should not have been hired based on various issues. But that psychological exam is a very difficult part in the hiring process, how things can change over time, just as health. I am not the same weight today that I was when I was hired in law enforcement. So different things change over time for various reasons. So I appreciate your question. Which other ones I have? I'm enjoying you all's questions so that we can deal with some of these issues and hopefully give you all some tools where you can go back and actually discuss and put these things in place. Because what's happening, do you all see what is really happening in our communities when these things are happening and we are losing people that should be with us? This gentleman should not have died. When we're looking at some of the others, we say they should not have died. So now when we're out there as a community, what are we doing so that we can make sure these things stop happening? And what is it that we're doing to make sure that we have individuals in place to address these? When you are looking right now with the voting, have you gotten your mail-in ballot? So therefore, if things are going a little crazy or you can't make it to the polls, have you gotten that mail-in ballot? Have you talked to your people that are running for office? Have you looked at their history on what they have been doing on the issues that are pertinent to you? And right now, if this is a pertinent issue to you, you should be Googling the individuals. You should be looking at their history. You should be asking them questions. You should be sending them emails. You should be doing that, getting together. Who is it that you all are putting in offices? Because this is a local issue that will make it to the Supreme Court in appeals and those type things. But at the very bottom of it, this is a local issue. So we have to look at it. Who are we putting in office? Also, when you're looking at resources in our community, to make sure we can hire the right police officers, hire the right firefighters, have the resources in our community. That is a census issue. How many individuals on this call have not filled out the census? These are things that also cause disparities in our communities. We need to be taking a hold to this. Some other ones. So leaders can work within agency policy and lead effectively. The operative word right there is can. Now, it's not talking about what we can do. We're talking about what it is that they're doing. And as you stated also with the psychological is an exam, and it's also governed by the individual that is giving the exam. It's kind of like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So yes, they are trained. Yes, they are in the medical field. But when it gets down to it, their interpretation of what you do or don't do is left up to that psychologist. And yes, they have checks and balances, but that is always one of those things that we look at. We look at these kind of things and we look at it and we say, how do we actually do this? How do we actually move forward? Who do we have as our psychologists? Have you all gotten involved in these processes? Because right now, when you look at what's happening in Minnesota, what comes next? Right now, we're looking for some transparency. And so I want to make sure I know that I go around and I mention the procedural justice and I answer some of y'all's questions because I value those questions on what is going on. Because when you look at it, fairness, isn't that what most of us are looking for? We're looking for some fairness. And how do we get the fairness? And we also want some voice. When we're talking, we want to be heard. We want our point of view to be heard and not just heard and put to the side. We want to make sure that our voices are heard. So how do you have your voices heard? You do that by making sure that you have plugged into the community. You make sure that they know what's going on. And if you notice that when things get to this point, there's certain individuals that you can always call. You're going to see the attorneys that have been representing the families in most of these cases. We know who they are. But before it gets to that, within your community, when was the last time that you met with your police chief or your sheriff or the commanders in your respective areas? When is the last time you reached out to your local fraternal order of police? When is the last time you said, hey, chief, I would like to really speak with you, or brought them out to your homeowners association? When is the last time you brought them out to your fraternal organization? I'm a member of Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated. You need to bring them out. We have members in our organizations that are in law enforcement. When have you had them to talk to you all to find out what it is that we can do to work with law enforcement? Because contrary to popular belief, law enforcement professionals, we want to work with the community and we want the community to work with us because we can't do our job by ourselves. Together we can move things forward. This is how we have to do things. Okay. Can you all hear me? I see Esther, you said that you can't hear me. Is everyone hearing me clearly or no? Okay, great. I see that they're hearing me okay. So what I want to do also is that when we look at things, right now, with what's going on in Minneapolis, when I've spoken with some individuals up in Minneapolis, I've talked to some law enforcement officers down here, and believe me, thank you, Selena, I'm glad that you can hear me. I am the law enforcement professionals that I have dealt with, black, white, all of us that I have spoken with are disgusted when we see things like this that tarnish the badge. And I know that we look at it and we wonder about it, but that is something that disgusts us because just like the minority community sometimes gets painted with a broad brush, law enforcement also gets painted with a broad brush. While this may have happened away from here, that broad brush gets painted on us. And you look at it right now, this happened in Minneapolis, but if there are protests down here, the officers that are down here that are serving and protecting and doing what we're supposed to be doing will receive that backlash from that. Those are some of the things that we're looking at. And when we look at it right now, just as a black male, like I tell individuals, when I'm not in uniform, I am a black male in America. I am aware of the issues. I have had some negative encounters with law enforcement. And that is part of the reason why I wanted to be in law enforcement, to help bridge this gap so that we can kind of get over this, so that we can kind of address some of the issues and open the eyes of individuals. And while in law enforcement, people are like, how come the organizations have not spoken up? A lot of times when we're in the organizations, we're looking for the community to plug in with us. We're looking to work with you all. Let us know what's going on. You can see individuals that have commented on this stream. You'll see how many people have commented on this. Google them. When you look at them, if they have those organizational insignia that they're putting up there, the NOBLE, the National Association of Black Police Association, reach out to them, contact us. A lot of things have gone virtual now. I know that the professionals I work with, if you're looking for individuals to speak to your organizations where you can gain some more insight, perhaps they can help your community, help bridge some gaps, we're all willing to assist. These virtual trainings, we can be anywhere. So if you're looking at it, let's connect. Let's connect. And the other one that we're looking at is impartiality. And when you look at it, when you look at procedural justice, once again, we have the four pillars: fairness, voice, transparency, and impartiality. And one of the things, when you look at the study of it and how it came about, it was looking at it from an officer safety standpoint. So with this one particular incident, can you imagine if you have this incident, but if you have some fairness, if it started out at the beginning, if you had some fairness, you had voice, transparency, and impartiality, would we be where we are now? Let's see this question here. Okay, Nadia, I know you're running for commissioner up there in Lauderhill. It says media will stop talking about. We will put it aside and move on, and like many others, they will get away with murder. One of the things that I will agree with you on a lot of times, Nadia, is that sometimes when people put things to the side and they forget about it, that allows people to do what it is they wish to do. That's why we as a community must make sure that we work together and we can do things. This is not a quick fix. And often, as we've stated before, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with a team. So if we as the Black community starts coming together, we start voting, we start filling out our census, we start getting those resources, then people cannot forget and cannot ignore the issues that are pertinent to us. When we become important, then we start saying, hey, this is it. Because elected officials respond to votes. Right now, are we voting? Are we looking at? You should be looking at those things right now, making sure you got things lined up, and should be having these meetings to deal with individuals that care about the community just as you do. This is how we deal with it. Let me see. I appreciate that. Claudel, glad to see that you joined us. And one of the things that you've done, and you're working up there in corrections, and this is one of the things we look at also. We have our corrections professionals that are over here, and many times when individuals are arrested, then they go into the correctional institution. And so now you're dealing with individuals that are inside the correctional institution and outside. And this is what I want you all to see. Here in this group now, we're having a lot of things here that go. Thank you, Ms. Teague. See this. You all were wondering how to contact some individuals. Here's someone that you could contact with National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. You could also reach out to me on any of these type things, and we can make some things happen. And what I want to do is I want to find out, is there anyone that have any other questions or anything specific that I would like, that you would like for me to address? Because I want to be valuing your time. It's about 10 till the hour. Okay, yes, we have the attorneys on here. Definitely. We'll make sure I've addressed our questions, see if there's any on here that I haven't. If there's some others that you would like for me to address, please let me know. Because one of the things that I wanted to do tonight is really discuss these type things, because one of the things that I've looked at is that when we have things that happen in our community, and if we do not address them, we do begin to say they don't care. Our younger generation looks at us and thinks that nobody cares, nobody's looking at things. We must basically learn what this system is and how it works. I always tell individuals, particularly in the city that I work in, is if I am here and I am an executive within the law enforcement department, if something happens and you don't let me know, how can I address it? And many times you think about it, if there's something that happens in some communities, they will email the city manager, email the police chief, and it will go down within the agency to where it needs to be to have the issue addressed. But if you do not let the agency know by saying they aren't going to do anything anyway, then I cannot be held accountable. I need everybody that's on the call. When you see things that law enforcement officers are doing, and you have a question about it, simply email the police chief, email the city manager. They will make sure that it gets to the right hands to have your issues addressed. And if not, what you're doing is you are creating an audit trail. And as we're doing this for officers that are not doing what they need to do, as someone asked earlier, you also need to be sending those same emails when officers do things that are outstanding, because that's how, when promotional opportunities come up, they start looking and seeing what is in the officer's file. Is it a lot of positive stuff or a lot of negative stuff? So if we as a community are not sending those emails and are not making the agencies aware of the outstanding and those that are less than outstanding, we are missing an opportunity for the staffing of our police departments. Anyone else have anything? Let me see something here. I see. Yes, Michelle, I'm glad you're on here with us. You had another question here. Say if it's not the person taking the exam, it's the person interpreting and grading the psychological. Most definitely agree with that. And we got some other things, Brother Harrison. Thank you, because these are things we're looking at. Part of the solution, we need to come up with solutions and go in there and start making some things happen. Dr. Benny Clark, thank you for being on. One of dentists out of Jacksonville area, another graduate of FAMU, another alpha man. Great to have you on as we have these discussions, because these are some of the things that we can be doing even from a business standpoint. At your dental practice, you might want to invite the police officers over to actually have a conversation within your dental practice to let the community know what it is that they can do. Then that's building some bonds there with the police community and your community. Let me see what else we have. Make sure we have some things down here. I have one here. Ms. Miller, hello, Dr. Sauce. A lot of officers are not trained on how to deal with the different culture of people that they are paid to protect and serve. Just as they are certified to be a law enforcement officer, officers need to have training on how to properly deal with people, and then train officers how to deal with themselves before they are dispatched to deal with anyone else. How can the different law enforcement organizations receive the proper training before they put these officers out? Now, that is a loaded question, and I will take it as such because I understand what you're saying. And you can also Google this, because one of the things that we look at is cultural competence. Because a lot of times when we talk about things and you're talking about the culture that we're dealing with, and if you Google it, cultural competence goes all the way up to some that are culturally incompetent, all the way up to individuals that are aware and where they are on their journey. So we have to look at that. But that is a, boy, excuse me. Excuse me. But that one is outstanding. Sorry about that. So now, okay, I'm better now. So that's an outstanding one. So the time now is about 7:56. And I wanted to appreciate you all for your questions and your input when we're dealing with these particular questions. This is something that's going to be ongoing. And I will be definitely having some individuals. I may have some officers and bring them on to interview them so that we can have a perspective of them and how we're going. But I want to tell you again, thanks a lot for tuning in to the Salt Mine Live. We're making some things happen to where we want to make sure we reduce the chances of Black males being killed and or harmed at the hands of law enforcement officers. We're out here working with our community. We're trying to bridge this gap and trying to make it where our community is a lot safer, because I believe that together we can do anything. So thank you all for tuning in. Tune in at the same time next week. This is Dr. Gregory Salters, and you all have been seasoned for success.